I'm Dr. Troy Spurl, and our podcast is Synapse Snips. Our podcast teaches people about how the body is supposed to work, basically how we were innately made. Have you ever wondered why you get headaches? Ever wondered why you wake up and you just, your feet don't work in the morning and they're achy, and then as you get walking, it gets better? Have you ever wondered why you don't remember your dreams? Have you ever wondered why you're gaining weight even though you're eating right, you're exercising, and the weight keeps coming on? Have you ever wondered why you're just feeling depressed? It's hard to get up off the couch. If you ever wondered about why you feel these things and why you're not just feeling right, listen to our podcast to get the answers. We get to the root cause and we tell you why. Make sure you're listening to Synapse Snips each and every week where we answer the questions that you guys have. Also, you can find us at officialsynapse.com. That's official synapse, synapse.com.
Hello and welcome to Synapse Snips. I'm Dr. Troy, and I am joined today by Rochelle Voth, our PA from down south, and Brianna Gregory, our expert from also down south, who joins us frequently here. And we are going to talk today about the FDA and the warning that came out recently about thyroid medication. So I'm just going to share my screen first here just to kind of bring up the headline, because I find this absolutely fascinating. And it basically says FDA warns that unapproved thyroid pills, and then it says it'll ensure access to them. So they kind of made a reversal there, and they actually give credit for the reversal to the power of the Make America Healthy Again movement. So there's a lot to unpack here, and you two are the two that I want to unpack this with. So let's just start with, you guys may have to fight over who gets to go first to talk about this, because I know that you're both very passionate about this, and it's funny because you both kind of reached out at like the same time and said we need to talk about this. So
Yeah.
Brianna, why don't you start first with just tell us a little bit about what the FDA came out and said, and then we'll start to unpack it from there.
Yeah, for sure. So as a pharmacist, you would think, myself being a pharmacist, you would think that pharmacies would be the first people to get notified.
Right.
And what's interesting about this particular announcement and others that we've been seeing recently is pharmacists are not even on the list of people that are being notified of this change. And we are the ones that literally dispense these medications. So what we're talking about are desiccated natural thyroid products that even as a compounding pharmacist, we do compound desiccated thyroid products, but we also carry products that people are more familiar with, like Armour Thyroid. So what we have seen is that people are very scared about this announcement and they're very confused. To start off with what desiccated thyroid is, it's just a fancy way of saying dried thyroid, essentially. So these natural products are products that are being pulled or extracted from a biological being. So a pig usually is what we're talking about, desiccated porcine or desiccated pig thyroid, where the thyroid gland is physically extracted from that animal. It is dried, so it still has those thyroid hormones in it. And then the manufacturers create a powder, they dry it up, they grind it up, and then they distribute it. So they send it to compounding pharmacies like us, and then they send it to the manufacturers of Armour Thyroid or NP Thyroid or whoever it is that is also making these similar type products. And what we see is that these products are life-saving for many individuals. Some people don't even have a thyroid, and you cannot live without a thyroid. So you have to replace that with something. So we started getting a lot of messages about a week and a half ago from both providers who write prescriptions and patients who take the prescriptions freaking out because they thought that their desiccated thyroid is going to be taken from them. And again, this is a life-saving medication for a lot of people. There's so many aspects of these announcements and the political involvement to unpack. There's definitely a considerable potential patient access issue and some conflicts of interest that we'll definitely discuss. But, you know, it starts with the patient, right? The patient comes into someone like you, Rochelle, they tell you their issues, and then it's up to you if you prescribe something like this. So what are you experiencing on your end with patients, and how does it feel as a prescriber?
Yeah, so to give everybody just a little bit of background, I like to call desiccated thyroid kind of like the original organ meats, not supplement in a sense, but you know how people are taking bison meat and bison liver today to kind of replenish their hormones. Desiccated is similar in that sense. It is a technical organ meat that we derive from it, the porcine gland, we take it out and we get from it. What people need to understand, what we get from that is T3 and T4 molecules that are specific in your thyroid function. T4 is like your reserves. T3 is the actual potentiating molecule that's doing the work of your thyroid. And then there's also T1 and T2 in there as well, versus synthetics, which is levothyroxine or Cytomel, leothyronine. That's synthetic T4 and synthetic T3. They are those molecules essentially alone. So it's not an aggregate culmination of T3, T4, T2, and T1, like desiccated would be, or NP, Armour, and Nature Thyroid. So that's a very big difference for people. As Brianna said too, some people are fine on T4 alone, but others are not, especially for someone like who's been post-thyroidectomy. They're not going to be making T4 and T3 because the average human, about 150-pound human who has enough iodine to support their thyroid on an average daily basis, like 150 micrograms a day, they make about 90 micrograms of T4 and they make about 5 micrograms of T3 in a 24-hour process. Then in the peripheral tissues, they usually can convert some of that T4 into T3 throughout the day, which is about 25 micrograms or so. So someone who doesn't have their thyroid is not having T4 and T3 in their circulation, nor the conversion of it if they don't have access to materials of it. So I don't want to give somebody who doesn't have a thyroid just T4. I want them to have T3 as well, because they could potentially convert all of that T4 into the necessary T3 that they have. But some people have genetic deficiencies and they don't have the enzymes to do that work. Some people really need a higher abundance of T3 just from a symptomatic standpoint because their metabolism's off. Their thermogenics are kind of up and down. They're really cold instead of hot. They might be having brittle hair, skin and nails, hair fall out. They might be constipated. They might be sluggish. They might have brain fog. They might have poor muscular endurance. All of these things become very important when we talk to a thyroid patient, a hypothyroid patient, I should say, in this particular case. So the conversation can get really large and really wide, depending on who you are as a patient. But I think that's a primary example of where this could be very alarming to certain cases if we can't have access to that desiccated product.
Yeah, and like you showed, sorry, Dr. Troy, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you. So I know you went through it real quick there, but can you name, or Brianna, if you can name the actual medications that are impacted here? So for people to actually understand what they are, number one. Number two, yeah, I agree with you, Rochelle, with everything you just said. And we see there's so many variables with it. And we know that T4, T3 conversion, if your zinc and selenium is not up to par, then we see a change with that as well. But can you also go through what's the difference between the synthetic and the actual more complete desiccated hormone? Because it's sometimes those little differences that make big differences with how that hormone is used. So maybe you could go through that, Brianna.
Sure. So the desiccated thyroid product that comes from the actual thyroid gland itself, if we think about that, it's a living organ inside of that animal. And so it's got all of the necessary components for complete thyroid functionality, like Rochelle said, and the body utilizes all the types of thyroid hormones. It's just that we talk about or give the most attention to T3 and T4. There's T1, T2, T3 and T4 that are in there. The body really utilizes a lot of T4 and T3 to make the amount of active hormone that it needs to counteract all of the symptoms that Rochelle just mentioned: the brittle hair, the nails that are cracking, the constipation, the poor sleep, all that. And when we are talking about a natural product, this is probably one of the most misunderstood parts of a conversation with a pharmacist, between a pharmacist and a patient, is, oh, I was told that my medication is natural. Okay, well, most things are not natural. We use that way too loosely. Unless you're going and you're pulling an organ out of an animal or you're picking a plant from the ground, you're no longer natural because it's been manipulated in a laboratory somehow. But I think where the confusion comes is on that sliding scale of how much it's manipulated or just completely created in a laboratory. There are many upsides to taking products that are created in a laboratory because they're consistent time over time over time. But what we see is that with the desiccated thyroid products, people respond really well to that. And in my professional opinion, the consistency is great across the board. So to answer your question about the difference, it's got the 4 types of thyroid hormones in there. But then to compare that with the synthetic version of thyroid, which is what the FDA is proposing that we switch everybody over to, is that may just be T3 or it may just be T4. And so people need both. And the other thing that we see is that, I mean, we can, talk about the science and the chemistry all day, but if at the end of the day, patients don't get better, then, who cares? So, I mean, we need to see that they're clinically responding. And probably 80 to 90% of my patients rely on and respond to the desiccated thyroid with all of those thyroid hormones in there, even though T3 and T4 is doing the heavy lifting. And they respond better to the natural product than they do the synthetic product. So the synthetic product is typically what we're talking about is Thyroid, or the generic levothyroxine, that they're little tiny pills that are dispensed at your retail pharmacy. People just don't seem to respond quite as good to those. So you've got on the synthetic side, you've got products like Thyroid, for example, and then on the natural desiccated thyroid side, you're talking more about Armour Thyroid is the most common one. And then also from compounding pharmacies is your other bucket of places where you can get those compounded for you, either as T3, T4, T3 and T4, or the desiccated thyroid. And what's interesting is that part of what we do in a compounding pharmacy is we customize dosing, right? And that's good. So people do fine on the T3 and T4 that is originally plant-based, what we refer to as bioidentical, but most people do better on the natural. So what's interesting is we don't even have to tweak that. We just give them a certain amount of the desiccated thyroid that's been pulled from that pig's thyroid.
And just to give people an idea, so 100 milligram, and Brandon, you correct me if I'm a little bit wrong on this or off based on numbers, but like 100 milligram tab of levothyroxine or Thyroid is the equivalent of 1 grain approximately of
100 micrograms, but yes.
100 micrograms, excuse me, yes, micrograms, MCG, not MG, so MCG. Just so people can understand kind of what the differences are between the two. So of levothyroxine and Thyroid, 100 micrograms would be the equivalent of 1 grain, or what we call 60 milligrams of Armour or NP Thyroid Nature Thyroid. And what that actually means and what's actually in that 60 milligrams is about 38 micrograms of T4 and 9 micrograms of T3. Did I do that conversion right? Yes.
Yeah, you got it.
So you can tell there's a big difference. So it's 100 micrograms in levothyroxine. The equivalency of that to a desiccated would be 38-9 split T4, T3. So they're very different. And we do that purposely because we want you to have the T4 in the reserves in your circulation so you can convert it upon demand. When you exercise, your skeletal muscle asks for it and says, I need more T3, let's go. But we give you an instant T3 impact in your circulation so that you have the the quick starter access of it available to you that you would not have with Thyroid alone. And some people just feel a lot better using that. And T3 versus T4, Brianna, you can also speak to this. They have different half-lives, meaning circulation vitality within your bloodstream. T4, I believe, is about 2 weeks or so in total. And T3 peaks within 2 to 3 hours, has like a 6 to 8 hour half-life. I've heard as long as 20. And so that is very different when we're talking about these two molecules. If you're in Thyroid land, synthetic T4 alone, you're not getting anything of that T3 that gives you that instant bioavailability and impact. But when you get a desiccated thyroid, you're getting a combination of both for a multi-purposed intent, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
we found that a lot of our autoimmune patients too just don't tolerate the synthetic versions as well. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it'd be very, very, very problematic and even catastrophic to have this actual FDA announcement become something. So my most important question to you both next is why? Why did this happen? Do we dare go there?
I think we have to go there.
Yeah.
To give people some background, and I think, Brianna, can I start where this all happened, and then you can take it and run with it. So desiccated thyroid, if people don't know, has been around since the 1890s. And it was first, what was his name? Dr. Robert, I think I wrote it down somewhere. No, Dr. George Redmond. Dr. George, I apologize. I will do you justice one day. Redmond Murray, I think it was. He used it on a female patient who was in myxedema crisis, which are very bad side effects from poor thyroid function. He used it on her. And so it's been around for a really long time. It's been around longer. Desiccated thyroid has been around longer than the FDA has, okay, to give people an understanding. It wasn't until about the 1970s that synthetics came out. So this T4 alone product, levothyroxine and Cytomel, T3 synthetic. And at that time when it came out, and still to this day, there are no comparative studies in the highest form of research, meaning it's a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study that compares T4 alone to a T4, T3 combination desiccated product to show which one has better efficacy and outcomes, okay? And so that has not been done. It still is not done, and nobody has the research on that available today. But Brianna, I think I'd love for you to speak more to the production category of that evolution of why did we switch into this versus the other. It was new kid on the block. There were a lot of hot pharmaceutical lunches that went on, and it was kind of the trendy thing to do. And then it was stop measuring T4 and T3 levels. Let's just use the TSH instead. That's kind of how the evolution went. But I'll let you speak because I think you're probably better equipped than I.
Well, no, that was great. So the FDA's announcements first, the first one was unapproved, natural thyroid medications. I mean, that sounds super scary, right? That's why you got to read the literature, you got to debunk and kind of follow the money, but see, what do these studies actually show? And if there aren't studies, we have to trace things back. We do have to follow the money. We do have to follow the approval timeline. And, when did the FDA come into place? When did these rules come into place? When did FDA approval of a drug even become a thing? And so, when they're talking about unapproved, what does that mean? So there was in 1938, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which largely has a very intimate overplay with pharmaceuticals and is established primarily as the FDA's formal drug approval process, was put in place, we are told, to make us safer and to regulate drugs that go on the market, to be sure that they go through rigorous multi-phase studies, that they prove safety, that they prove efficacy, that they go through animal studies, that they go through human studies, that they go through longevity studies, meaning that even when a drug has been approved and it's on the market and it's being prescribed and taken by patients, that it's still safe even 10, 20, 30 years down the line after it's been on the market. You see these pharmaceutical commercials that are filing massive lawsuits because they've uncovered things down the line. But all that to say, prior to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act going into effect, desiccated thyroid products were already being used and prescribed, like you said, Rochelle. So they were grandfathered in. So that's how they've been legally marketed and legally prescribed to both prescribers and direct to consumer to patients on the television, et cetera, in offices. And that is completely legal. Now, apparently the FDA is concerned, and what's making them unapproved is it's a safety and an efficacy concern. But again, we've seen over the past several decades that patients do exceptionally well. And to my knowledge, there have been recalls on the synthetic thyroid prescriptions. I hadn't seen one on Armour, but we know it's very safe as far as what we see clinically with our patients, continually monitoring labs and monitoring side effects. Because if we have side effects or adverse events, we as pharmacists are required to report that. One of the things that just really struck me wrong in this FDA there's a few, right? Okay, one specifically that really struck me wrong in both of those FDA announcements, but especially the one that you brought up on the screen at the beginning, Dr. Troy, is that they said, if you take too much, there could be adverse side effects. Are you kidding me? What about Ozempic? Like, are you kidding me? I mean, these drugs, if they're used at the appropriate dose, are, can be safe, but we need to verify that through clinical experience, which is what we've been doing for the past several decades. What's interesting is it's not just Armour Thyroid either. So, or desiccated thyroid and natural thyroid products. But what kind of Pandora's box is this opening? There are other drugs that were also grandfathered in prior to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, like colchicine, nitroglycerin, morphine. I mean, there's a longer list.
I didn't know
We're
that.
still doing those, so are we going to have, backlash on those too? I don't know. But something that is still leaving a big question mark for me and is not clear in that most recent release, I think it was on Friday that you showed, Dr. Troy, is they say that now they're going to ensure access. So what does that mean? That this has all been reversed? No. Some people are saying online that it's been reversed. It has not been reversed. We're not anywhere different than we were 2 weeks ago. But like Rochelle said, we don't have any existing literature or completed trials comparing something like desiccated thyroid to a synthetic version. Last time I checked, it's still stuck in phase 2 right now of trying to push something like that forward. But this is where the conflict of interest, one of the places that conflict of interest comes in, is that the company AbbVie makes Armour Thyroid, for example, and it used to be Allergan that made Armour Thyroid. AbbVie acquired Allergan, and guess who is publishing that study? Allergan, right? So part of the FDA's push is that not only are these unapproved and they should be taken away, but if they're going to continue, then you can only make them and sell them if you have a biologics license. And that might sound so simple as just applying for the license, but it's not. It means that it takes it out of all compounding pharmacies, because compounding pharmacies cannot compound biologic drugs. That's against the law. And that means you have to have a biologics license, you have to apply for it, and then you usually have to wait, my understanding is several years to get that in place, because your processes and your facility and everything have to be verified. So when the FDA came out with their original article on this, they said, well, we don't want to cut off everybody right now. We're going to give you 12 months for all prescribers to get their patients switched over from desiccated natural thyroid to synthetic thyroid. But even 12 months isn't long enough. It doesn't give people enough time to apply. And so what if time runs out and manufacturers don't have these biologics licenses? Then desiccated thyroid does go away. But rumor has it that AbbVie has their biologics application in motion right now. So that means that they would, I suppose, monopolize this whole function and drive up the cost, is at least what our prediction is. Because, if only one company's making it, then that's likely what's going to happen.
Yeah, so you answered the question of why right there pretty well. And so also it's important for people, we don't want you to be concerned, but there's definitely levels of attentiveness that needs to stay on top of this subject. And it's very, very important. And I'm going to kind of call out the elephant in the room here. The big issue with this is trust when it comes to trusting who is doing what. And I know for myself as a practitioner, I would love to see safety and efficacy as compared to the synthetics. We actually want that data.
Right.
The problem is who's doing it and how are they reporting it, and do we trust the source? There's been a bit of a breakdown when it comes to trust, when it comes to these processes. Anytime you do have the potential for a monopoly, or anytime you have someone who's trying to maintain control over something that has a 130-year track record, like Rochelle was saying, there's an issue with that, especially when so many people, we're talking about millions of people that are being prescribed and given these doses right now that are effectively helping them. So the trust part of it is really a big deal. I think your prediction is pretty bang on myself. We've become nothing if not discerning over these last 7 years for various reasons. And so that is, I think, a very good and bold prediction. But the one part of that news story that I kind of liked was, I'll read it again. The apparent reversal illustrates the power of the Make America Healthy Again movement. And there's so much depth to this, but we have to be careful because we can actually think we're making good choices when we're not quite there. And again, the reason why so many people have thyroid issues is because of the quality of our food, the quality of our environment, the different things that become endocrine disruptors and can cause thyroid problems. That's actively being worked on. But we can't dismiss our safety nets things that are actually keeping people afloat during that process as well. And so it's very, very important for people to stay abreast of what's happening and educate themselves on this process and be aware of what's happening, not just at the federal level, but at the state level as well. And so any comments from either of you on just the Make America Healthy Again component to this, the pushback that they received? But I also want to just one other comment, because you nailed it when you said, yes, there was pushback. Yes, they changed it, but it doesn't mean they've actually changed their ulterior motives here.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Rochelle.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I see, at least from the grassroots community, many of the practitioners that prescribe these medications understand the vitality of them for patients, are being very vocal and very active. They've contacted their pharmacists, they've contacted the pharmacies. They are asking, who can we sign the petition with to make sure that we are continuing to be the advocate for the safety and the benefit of our patients. And so that's, at least from a practitioner standpoint, where a lot of energy is being placed. So that's how this all came about. Even I reached out to Brianna and I said, have you seen this? And I knew she already had, but I said, who's babysitting the FDA? No, I said, put me, I volunteer.
Right.
But anyways, and so I think from a grassroots community, we're very involved. We are very on the day-to-day, minute-to-minute, looking to see what can we do to be an advocate for the patients that need this life-saving medication, as I'm going to put it in that category. I won't get off track, but I will say this. I came from the generation who was taught on levothyroxine and Synthroid only. I actually didn't really, frankly, know much about Cytomel and leothyronine, which are, the synthetic T3. And I have a direct quote from an attending, and this is not to put them under the bus or anything, it's just a product of their training too. But I remember being in the hospital on rounds, and a patient came in on Armour Thyroid, and they said, we're not going to use that. That's an antiquated medication, causes too much variety and problems. So that was how I was trained. I was trained to think NP Thyroid and Armour are old, they're outdated, and synthetic T4 is the bee's knees. It does so much better for people long term. So I came from that generation, and then I stepped into functional medicine. I knew a little bit more about this, desiccated product, started using it on patients. And I'll just say, hands down, people do better. They really, really, truly do, just from a general oversight of clinical application without perhaps the studies comparatively. I will say that I am a believer in it based off of the experiences that I've had with my patients and the lack of toxicity that it was so claimed to purport. And so I'm going to continue to be an advocate for my patients on this forefront. But Brianna, go ahead and speak to what else is being done to do that for people if you have it.
Yeah, we really will provide the links for these petitions that need to be signed. It's very clear that we've caught the ear of the FDA, and we're not out of the woods yet with it, which is why Rochelle and I were so eager to hop on here with you, Dr. Troy, as soon as we could, to let people know and to keep this top of mind for people, because we have to come together and be able to read through these FDA released articles, which can be, frankly, they can feel like reading through a legal document. I mean, honestly, it takes a few pharmacists coming together and talking about, how do you interpret this? That's how murky these announcements are, and what do we do for our patients? So what we're doing right now is we're allowing all of our patients to have a total of 3 months on hand, because people panic. They're asking to get 1 year supply on hand. We're already seeing supply chain issues right now. So even a pharmacy that has, thyroid is one of the most common medications that we dispense. So we have pull, if you will, on how much we get when we place an order. We're already being allocated. So we have to be sure our patients have enough on hand to keep, their minds at ease, but not medications that's going to expire and not a year's worth, because we all know what happens when all that is kept on hand. But we just have to stay hot on these petitions, share, spread that information like wildfire. And then when you sign these petitions, you get to share as much as you want about your personal story. My mom's been taking this medication since she was in her 20s, and some people have been reliant on for a long time. As a compounding pharmacist, we see a lot of different people walk through our doors for a lot of different reasons. For us to compound something, there either has to be a reason why we take some of the nasty ingredients out of it that are present in commercially available drugs sometimes. Sometimes they have a true allergy to one of those inactive ingredients in the drug, and they need an alternative. Some people do not have a thyroid. So there's a lot of different types of people that require this medication. And if anything, I hope that that's what the FDA hears, and that they, I hope they reverse the whole thing. But if there has to be a plan B, I hope they give an extension of time for the appropriate studies to be done. So take home point, please sign these petitions and share them all around.
Yeah, well said. And when the three of us were together a while back in Atlanta at the IMA, the Independent Medical Alliance, and they made a very key statement there. I can't remember who said it, but they basically said they're talking about the healthcare system and everything that RFK is doing and everything that the new people being brought in are doing. They said we have an 18-month window to make change, to get the right people in the right seats, to make this go beyond anything other than a short-term blip when it comes to actually getting it right with our healthcare system. So not only that, petitioning against things like this, but getting the right people in the right seats that can see through what really needs to happen. And it seems like common sense, but when you actually have the dollar sign and other components infiltrating things, it can become a little cloudy for people. So getting people in the right seats is a big part of this. And I want people to know, just because certain people like RFK are there doesn't mean we're done. We're just getting started, and we need to keep eyes on, and we need to stay focused on getting the right people in the right seats to continue to bring stuff up like this so it can get cleaned up along the way. So I pray this is one of those scenarios myself.
I nominate Troy and Brianna to be on the ball.
We're not going to you.
If this circulates loud enough, we volunteer.
Right. All right. Any last comments from either of you on the subject? Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a really good book out there, because I'm all about resources for people in education, especially when it comes to if this is personally affecting your own health. It's by Dr. Antonio. I have it right here, Bianco. I don't know if you can kind of see this. It's called Rethinking Hypothyroidism. He's an endocrinologist. He has been doing thyroid research his whole career, 30 plus years. And I often refer patients to read this book because it talks about the entire evolution of thyroid treatment over the years. It'll have some studies in here that you can refer to. It's just going to equip you with your own education and more understanding of how a thyroid even works, how it functions, and then the differences between the synthetics and the desiccated, what might be a good option for you. And he goes into the pharmaceutical bias behind it as well. And so this is a really valuable resource that I think has been good for people. I did find in it, for example, one study that he referred to as a 2013 study. So again, we don't have any double-blinded, placebo-controlled, randomized controlled studies on trials on T4 versus desiccated alone, but there is what's called a crossover study. And it was double-blind, it was placebo-controlled. So it was a crossover study, which means that people were put on T4 and then switched over to DTE, or desiccated thyroid, and flip-flop first. Thus, they start on DTE and then they were crossed over to T4. And they did study 70 of those patients. And in that study, they showed that 48.6.9% had a preference for DTE, desiccated, over the synthetic T4, and there were statistical significance when it came to primary endpoints improving, like brain fog, energy, I think it was a quality of life, mental clarity, and then mood. Also, on average, more people lost a little bit of weight, like 3 to 4 pounds. So that's an interesting study to me because it's kind of close to what we're talking about, but it is a crossover study, so it's not technically grade A evidence. But this book in particular will go through things like that to kind of help you just put more pep in your step and help you understand a little bit more of the whole enchilada as it's evolved through time.
No, that's really good. We're communicating so much through social media now. Even a lot of people are finding out about on this through X, and RFK is replying back to the FDA on X, and it's just so funny, like, how did we get here? But here we are. So, I try to be very outspoken on social media about this information, not because I have one opinion, one way or the other. I guess my opinion is, it's for the patient, right? Like, what's best for you. So that's a conversation you have to have with your prescriber as the patient, and as part of this holistic approach that, the three of us take. It's all connected. Like you said, Dr. Troy, the food supply is a major issue, and that's being worked on, but it's not just RFK's responsibility. we are going to see a whole slew of things come down the pike with autoimmunity, and those things are going to continue to get worse before they get better.
Yeah.
And so it's actually our due diligence. It's not just the prescribers, it's not just the pharmacists, it's the patient. We're all patients too. And we hold that responsibility to be outspoken, to also work to preserve access. I don't think we should have to, but we do. It's the time that we live in. So we're all equally responsible.
Yeah, we will advocate for you, but we need each and every one of you listening to this to advocate for yourself as well and each other.
That's
Very,
right.
very crucial. Yep. Well, awesome. Thank you both. I knew you two would have the answers I was looking for. So thank you on that. I look forward to whatever comes next out of the FDA's mouth, and I'll call you guys both up again and we'll get this going one more time. So I also pray that we have 2 strikes against us on YouTube. So this could be the final nail in the coffin, but we'll find out. We'll be on our other platforms as well. So thank you both for joining us, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Synapse Snips podcast. If you like what you heard, subscribe to the podcast and share the podcast. To learn more, check out our website at www.officialsynapse.com. Until next time, this has been Synapse Snips podcast. We'll see you on the next episode. This podcast is for information purposes only and should under no circumstances be considered medical advice or a substitute for medical care. Any information given in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease and is at the user's own risk. Please first consult a licensed healthcare professional.